Okay, thought this might be a little bit fun. So I have just finished painting up my Kroot Killteam. So that's the Navy Breachers and the Kroot and the Into the Dark terrain ready. So I'm pretty happy with that. Hopefully I'll get some games in it soon. Um, for today, I wanted to do a couple of individual models, or at least one individual model. So I like doing big units. They're all magnetized, so click on the base. I like doing lots of big units to kind of get them out of the way, ready for a game. But every so often, it's nice to have a break and just work on one model. It's a bit refreshing. It's kind of a different kind of take. So the army painting is one style of approach, and then I guess you'd call them character painting. The individuals are, yeah, you get to take your time on one and just enjoy that. So that's what we're going to do this. I popped down to my local games workshop. You also get monthly figures. So these are 2 different months. Um, and I figured I'd do these today. It's just something cool. You should be able to go in and pick up these. So this one here is the Lizardman, which is for start of June. I think they're doing 2 different ones for June. And then this one here is last month's one for May. I've subbed in another base there. So depending on your local store, go in and ask. What you're supposed to do is you're supposed to, in there, take the clippers and clip them out and then assemble the model. So, as you can see, these are very badly assembled. I didn't put enough glue in. So, yeah, my local store seems to be okay with me going in and not properly assembling them. And then what I do is I come home and I tidy them up. So, the clippers that you get in GWs aren't great. I use a Tamiya ones, and then I clean up, do a bit of tidying, and then I glue it together with some of this tin cement, which is a little bit easier to control. So I figured I would do these today. And here we just have the end of me doing the Saurus. I just missed recording the first part. But there's only so much you can actually show in one of these. My normal approach is to take a piece out of the sprue, tidy it up straight away, and then dry fit it. So make sure you're always testing where you're about to assemble, make sure you're going to the right spots. Sometimes the instructions are off, which is a problem. In this case, obviously there was no instructions, but it went together pretty easy. When I'm using the Tamiya cement, this one is very thin, so I normally put a small layer on each side before I put them together. That seems to work quite well. And here we're moving over to the airbrushing. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to get a nice black primer down. So the point of the initial primer is just to get something for the paint to stick to. So you don't really have to get 100% coverage. I'm not particularly good with the airbrush. This is one of the Green Stuff World airbrushes. It's relatively cheap. When you're airbrushing, so you can see I'm wearing a mask. I have this in an extractor fan booth. That's kind of pulling it out the window. And what we're doing here is, so first black, then we're going into Gulvarback red. So it's kind of nice, giving it a nice reddy tone. Then we're spraying underneath with the magenta, and then finally what we're actually going to do is we're going to go and put on a Temple Guard blue on top. I've used this style before for my Lizardman Blood Bowl team, and it comes from Marco from Not Just Mecha. So there'll be a link in the description, basically saying where he gets it from. The idea here is to have that kind of reddy color coming through, but then still have that strong blue over it. And here we're moving over to the Arbites. So we start off with a black primer from Vallejo, and now we're going into kind of a 3-step. So I love doing black in this particular scheme. It's something I picked up from Next Level Painting, so some really great airbrush tips there if you want to check them out. So it is tire black, then rubber and rubber highlight. So black isn't really black. If you do a perfect black, you'll kind of get a very boring miniature. So this is a green tinted black over the black, and then 2 color gradations up. So I'm airbrushing on the kind of shoulder pad and the leg, the knee, so anything that's kind of coming up, and I do the tar black all over, just get the color down, and then I do rubber highlight, so you kind of get the gradations up, and then later I'll be using those colors to do some of the edge highlighting. Okay, so we've got the initial airbrushing down. So we've got this blue, we've got a bit of magenta, a bit of reddish underneath. So we're going to try to keep that as much as possible. Except for this guy's do a bit of gold on. And then on the Arbites, not quite as severe as it could be, but you can see there's a little bit of a lighter grey up here. Didn't get it on the helmet as much as I wanted, but whatever. So we'll be looking at doing a lot of edge highlighting on these guys to make the black out as much as possible, but it should be quick enough to do. Right, so I am going to work on some of the golds. The Seraph one first. I'm going to use this one, which is kind of a weird gold. Don't actually particularly like it too much as a gold, but I do find it looks quite well on a Seraphon. So it doesn't look like the kind of gaudy Retributor gold. It kind of feels like, I don't know, Seraphon gold. So I'm going to work on. Since we're doing some metallics, we are not using a wet palette, and we're using one of the bad synthetic brushes. I always have trouble with my metallics because they wreck the brushes, and at some point you'll be painting away and you'll just lose your tip. You'll have splitting brushes. It's a menace. Can't think of a better way to deal with it beyond, you know, switching over to a better brush, but it's a little unfortunate. Here I've moved over to some Skaven Blight tinge. So basically we need a, I guess it's rock, it's a bit of a rock colour. So Skaven Blight tinge is a nice grey brown that seemed to work quite well for this. So we're just doing it with the hammer. You did kind of see me take out a hairdryer there. It's a really handy tip. Lets you get your layer down and get it dried a little bit faster than you would otherwise. So I also did use it for the earlier. And here we have some Screamer Pink. So I've taken out the palette before. I was being a bit lazy with Skaven Blight tinge. I definitely could have. And we've got one of my nicer brushes. So I used Screamer Pink on every weapon. There is presumably some sort of creature out there in every universe that I do miniatures in that does has a hide that looks like Skaven. The hide that looks like Screamer Pink. We've got Doombolt Brown, doing some of the ropes and bits and pieces. Obviously, you know, any sort of brown, any sort of color. I think for my Blood Bowl team I did use a bit of a beige. And then we're just slowly getting through. So these will get hit by a wash, an Agrax wash at some point, just to make them look a bit better. Here we have moving over to Carbide Crimson. So what I wanted to do here is I want to put a little bit of separation in between the scales. The red is good with the blue because it ends up a bit dark, and also it's kind of reinforcing that underlayer of red. So you get this kind of really nice effect where you've got the the transition that we got with the airbrush, but you also have a bit more of a division. Here I did try with Reichland shade, but didn't like it when I was looking for a wash in the metals on the gold. Instead I changed over to the Agrax that I felt just looked a lot better with this particular gold, this particular metal. And then of course the new popular Black Legion Citadel contrast color, which is just great for doing a straight black. Not using it as contrast at all, I'm just picking out the claws and a few bits and pieces. And then yeah, I was just tidying up the mouth with the red and doing all of the teeth, starting with Ubashti Bone and then doing Screaming Skull, it's a lighter colour, just more to the tip. Now you could put a little bit extra white into that and maybe pop a little bit more if you wanted. This was to kind of darken down the upper shades. So this was a mix with the turquoise contrast. I was very, very sparing on it because I didn't want to get it too dark. I definitely didn't want it to sink in. And then we went in and we did some highlighting, or edge highlighting. So here we are taking that bright Baccarat blue and we're just, doing a little line around all of the edges of all the scales. It'll make it look really poppy. I think an important thing to understand about this is when you're watching somebody else do it, it looks like they know exactly where the paint is supposed to be on each of these little elements and they're putting it exactly there. That's not true at all. We're just putting down where it feels natural, and if it works, it works. There's a lot of cases where, if you looked over the model, you'd find scales where you feel like maybe there should have been a highlight, or you'll find highlights that you maybe feel weren't properly there. There are approaches you can take, with the focusing on the high points for it, or imagining light coming in at an angle. But in this case, I'm literally just trying to edge, go all the way around each of the scales and just make that look good. If you were doing it, you would do it differently and it would look just as good. But the important thing here to remember is that often when you're watching the experts do it, it looks like they know exactly what they're doing, when really they're just getting in there and playing with the model and getting it down. At this stage, we're getting into the last few details, so we're doing a bit of a edge highlight on that escaping blight with the Dawnstone. We're breaking out some of the bold titanium white to get some dots on the eyes, and then we're going back over with the Yandan yellow contrast to turn those white into yellow. Then after that, it's a bit of tidy up. So here we're mixing in some of the colors. So I'm mixing in that white. I think I'm mixing it with some of the bone color as well, just to try to get a little lighter color that I can highlight up with. And then we're going back over some of the gold to lighten it up. I think I'm using a little bit of silver in there as well to lighten it up. And that's us done with the Saurus. Right, let's move over the Arbites. So there aren't a lot of colors on this particular model. So we obviously have the black. The major part is the red. So what we're doing here is we're starting with a base of corn red, which is always a fantastic color to work with. It's a nice dark red and we'll end up lighting up. And then there we're just getting that stripe in. So I was literally just doing a line down and keep doing a few lines down until we get it right. This one is a leather brown. So we're just going to layer this on to all of the leather parts. So that's just a lot of straps, holsters, pouches. As far as I'm aware, the Citadel equivalent of this is XV88. But look, for any of these colors, you're just looking for something similar to it. If you don't have the exact brand or even the exact color, like you can play around with different brands and you can, alter, you can mix paints to kind of get the color that you're looking for. Then what we're going to do is we're going to do a wash over it. I'll probably use Agrax, but you can use any of the wash, kind of darken sections down. And then we're going to mix in a little of a lighter color to get ourselves a highlight. So we don't have to have the perfect colors. Close enough is good. And in the description, I will link to an excellent resource which does show equivalents across the different ranges, which is always handy. So here we're painting the white stripe, and I'm painting it basically straight over the black, and I'm getting decent coverage. What I'm using is a white grey from Vallejo. Really what you're looking for is any light grey that's got decent coverage, so you're able to get that on even over this kind of black area. Now, we're not doing a pure white, because what we want to do is we want to have the white later as a highlight that we can put on. Okay, here we are moving on to the gold for the Arbites. So basically their shoulder pad. There are a couple of other bits as well. What I'm doing here is I'm starting with Canoptic Alloy, which is a really kind of silvery, brassy color. It makes a fantastic base when you are looking to do a gold. This is something I picked up off of Juan Hidalgo, who does a fantastic series of heavy contrast, and for my own Chaos Warriors, I use his guide. Now, what he does is he uses a Gore Grunt of Fur to contrast medium mix over it afterwards to give it a kind of more of a reddish tone. Gives a really nice gold effect. I have to admit, I did do that here. I maybe think that I could have gone for something more like Skeleton Horde, or maybe I just didn't water it down or use contrast medium enough to get it far enough down to where I was happy with it. But you know, the key point here is you get a great effect and you get a great amount of control if you start with Canoptic Ally, which is a light silvery gold, and then darken it with some sort of contrast shade. Now we're getting a little bit more into the serious business of actually doing the armor. So we had already established kind of a few layers with the airbrush. What we're doing now is something called panel lining, essentially. So I learned this from watching Angel Giralda's videos. The idea here is to use the basilicanum contrast to paint between the armor plates, basically to add a little bit more darkness, to give greater definition between the two plates. Then when we get on with doing the highlights, it'll be a little bit more poppy. Here we're getting some Airbrush Earthshade. We're just going to put these over the letter parts. A tip you can see I got from Peachy in the painting phase. Here I've used the brush protector to help us keep the pot open. And here's that contrast Gorgunta fur, thinned down slightly to give some definition to the gold parts. For the edge highlighting on the leather belts and pouches, I'm just taking the leather brown that I already have on my palette, mixing in some of the lighter colours I already have, and combining them together. We're doing a little bit more work on the red now. So this started as a corn red. It did get the Airbrush Earthshade as a wash, and now we're putting a layer of Mephiston red on it. So I've already coloured in the visor in a white. And what we're doing here is we're getting Gryph-hound orange and then just adding it in. So as it is a contrast, it'll operate kind of weirdly. And what will happen is the darker colour will be around the edge and the lighter colour will be in the middle. I'm actually going to reinforce that a little bit later. I'm going to do another layer of white into the middle and then do more contrast over it again to build up that kind of glowy effect. Here we're just edge highlighting with Canoptic alloy, so it's because it's been darkened down, this kind of brings it out again. And here we're finally getting into the major highlighting part for the black. So in this case, I'm only using the rubber highlight, which is the lightest of them. Now, what you can do if you want it to have it a little fancier, you could do a double edge highlight. So in this case, you would use the rubber, which is kind of the mid-tone, and do a kind of thicker highlight. Then you would take the rubber highlight, do a thinner edge highlight, and then at the end, and I did this a little bit later as well, you'll use like a white or a really light color to do some spot highlights. As we use the Vallejo steel for the main metal part, which is the kind of equivalent of gunmetal, we're able to use silver as a edge highlight for any of the metal parts here. So we're also catching any rivets or any of the bits that are kind of more of a pure silver. At this point, we're essentially done. So I'm just going to go back and do the base. We're using one of the Void War bases. And what I'm doing here is I'm doing an initial color of Vallejo Steel, and then we're using this Dirty Down Rust. So you can see me using the hair dryer here because it really helps work it. So Peachy has a great video of the painting phase explaining how to go through it. Essentially what I'm doing is I'm putting down a little bit of the Dirty Down Rust onto some splotches, and then I'm taking some water and running around it, and then I'm using the hairdryer on a high heat to, I guess, activate it, make things work, and you just get this really great rust corroded effect. And then to finish it up, I'm using a little bit of Necron Compound, the dry silver, to round it out. I decided I want to bring that red up a little bit more, so I went down and got some Wild Rider Red, which we're going to use as an additional highlight here. So we're just edge highlighting the various red parts on it, nice and quick. And then after that, it's just a couple of small details. So I do go back in and I work on the visor a little bit more. I do have a look at some of the lights and bits and pieces. But essentially, we're done at this stage. I took one of the Underworld bases that are, already have the molding in it, and used one of those as a base for the Lizardman. And then the next day, I brought them both into Games Workshop. Brought them into my local Warhammer in Dublin, where they're sitting now. So thank you for indulging me. I know painting videos aren't something that this channel normally does, but it was a lot of fun to do, and there will be links in the description with all of the actual painting channels that I get my inspiration from and that helped me out to do this. So if you enjoy this, mention, like, and maybe we'll do this again for the next monthly Warhammer movie.